authority is watching as some unsavory things are being said about the leadership. So then you have that, what do you call, instinctive running up and fighting, you know, like a street battle up there, or rather, it's bad.
Right.
It's bad. You know, for the independence must be asserted by Parliament being run basically in the best possible way by the leadership. We were there. We ran with Marende the Parliament, and we were not at any given time subservient or subordinate in any way to the whims of what was you know, we were both from the same party. Both of us were from ODM that time, and we had the leadership of ODM was the Prime Minister. And there's no way the Prime Minister would come and tell us, well, do this and do that, and then we will again, you know, you read the Riots Act and you're told, move in this direction. It never happened that way.
By force. Jarvis, what's your take about this, the 12th Parliament, and also the reason you know, behind the opposition saying that they will keep off most of the parliamentary business?
First, Betty, very important. It should be counted as high honor for any person to be worthy of the esteem of Kenyans and elected to serve in Parliament, whether as a senator or as a member of the National Assembly. It must be counted as high honor. To therefore abdicate or be sluggish or drag their feet in attending to the business of a house itself is to spit in the faces of Kenyans who elected them. From the tradition of the founding of Matters Legislature or Matters Parliament, whether it was during the times of King George VIII, whether it was during the times of King Edward I, you realize that parliamentarians were supposed to be the wisest of men and women in the land. So, by way of deliberations in the House today, if this is truly a depiction of the wisest men and women in our land, then there is so much to fear. Yes, we know that people are pulling in different directions because of political interests. Yes, as Honorable Farah Maalim has indicated, it disappoints even an average observer that members of Parliament will or are genuflecting in the House purely on the positions of the party leadership or what they imagine should be the party leadership's position or interests on an issue on the floor. Now, just last week or the other, we witnessed a situation where members of NASA withdrew from participating in important House business. Now, we know very well that there is discretion and independence of the House, the legislature. That independence itself, yes, it is institutional as well as decisional. And that is why any decision made by that arm of government is as important as the House itself. And so when we see debate in the House degenerating to very minute issues, or people making a joke of important House proceedings, or people departing from a long-held tradition, as Honorable Maalim has indicated, where members of the House would rise on their feet to make sure that they take the honor of that House forward. It's to take Kenyans for granted, firstly, and secondly, it is to bring dishonor to the provision of that House by way of legislation and even the Constitution itself.
Interesting. Coming to you, Honorable Wanyiri, I mean, you said that we should give this Parliament time, that, that most of them are people who have been elected for the first time. They've not even stayed in Parliament resumed yesterday. But just going by what Jarvis is talking about, the fact that, they were not, the opposition members of Parliament were not, there to represent Kenya and to take these people to task in a very important process. Don't you think that that should worry you, even as at now?
I must say that I'm a very worried person in terms of the functions of Parliament. And I come from the same kind of background as Mheshimiwa Maalim here. And I was also in the 8th Parliament. And even before that, you see that even when there was a one-party state in this country, from 1969 up to 1982. There are some members of Parliament who are very functional, very focused, and they were all in Kano. But they had the issues of this country at heart. Whether it's issues about change, the Constitution, the one-party state, about the functioning of the economy, about the unity of our people. They were there and they were never silenced. And I must say that now what has happened is that last 3 elections, most likely, one can see the tendency that is now coming to the fore of members being very amenable to certain individuals, because the public also, that is also what the public has become, that they have become followers of certain people, and they don't even need to know what that person stands for. The people have been on the ground for a long time, and I would say that maybe it is automatic for some people to think that unless you follow so-and-so, it will not be possible for you to be elected. So I'm saying about this parliament that there are inherent weaknesses in how it is elected, in how the country has functioned for the last 3 parliaments, the last 15 years, and therefore it is more and more difficult for a member to be dependent and to be focused and to have a voice. You don't have to be everybody. Everybody doesn't have to act in concert. You can actually even be very few people, but there is that room for leverage and for persuasion that is always there in good debate, like my friend has said, that eventually it is leadership is focusing on how your people are living, 45 to 50 million Kenyans. That is what is important to be reflected in Parliament. But if that is not actually working, like if the hospitals are not working, if they are not working properly, if our schools have been wounded and the children there are suffering, if you look at the level of the functioning of the economy has gone down, then I think it will be expecting too much to see Parliament functioning outside of that kind of environment. That is the environment we have in this country today. And therefore, when you find members are going back to Parliament, they have been resting through Christmas, they have been resting through New Year, and maybe they are not prepared to work, and their ears are on what is coming from that side, then you can understand with a broader perspective why members would want to listen more closely and maybe even say we are not going to participate in that, because they think that question of passing judgment on a cabinet, for instance, cabinet secretary, has already been predetermined, if you remember.
And it shouldn't be like that, shouldn't it?
That is not how it should be. But if you remember the last parliament, even the last parliament, I still remember very well how difficult it was even for the opposition to participate on that question of vetting of the cabinet secretaries. And that problem has come back again.
It has come back. Honorable Malim, just coming back to the issues that both the guests have raised, and the larger house is seemingly eager to abide by the wishes of the executive. Don't you think that this is a time that we should have a stronger opposition coming in to counter all this, the Jubilee agenda, like it has been termed?
You see, like I told you from the beginning, it's people come from different backgrounds. There is nothing that prepares you to become a parliamentarian. There's a process that prepares you to become a good advocate, a good, what do you call, teacher, a good doctor, a good specialist. But there's nothing that prepares you to become a good parliamentarian. Now, the thing that is always very good in any parliament, anywhere in the world, is to have the steps, to have different generations represented in that place, so that there are certain very wise institutional memories of Parliament itself. In the 7th Parliament, for example, I shared that Parliament with Lawrence Agini, who was a Minister for Education when I was in Standard 1 in 1964.
Wow.
I shared with Nyachai, who was former head of civil service. Of course, Kibaki was there, who has a history. But even more than that, Achengo Neko, who was a freedom fighter and who was there in detention when with Kenyatta and the rest of them. The late Dennis Okumu. So there was that, and you find it in America. You go right now and you find in the House of Representatives very old sages, people full of wisdom, who have been in that House of Representatives for the last 30 years, or even more than that. You see, right now, what happened is that when we were going for elections in 2013, there was at the same time when these people are serving in there, the president was Obama, who is a very young man.
Yes.
You know what I mean? A very, very young man. But you see, but when we went for the elections of 2013, there was a very powerful but very erroneous and a very retrogressive narrative that basically took hold, that the leadership of this country has got to have a generational change. You see what I mean? You never do that in any society. I mean, there is the mind and the ability to run a nation is an attribute of God, and also training and the rest of it. You can get it from Ronald Reagan, who became a president at the age of 69. You can also get it from a very young man, like I think the youngest they had in America to ascend to the presidency was Bill Clinton. Am I right?
Yeah.
Bill Clinton. He was only 45, 43, 45, around there. I can't remember.
And Kennedy also.
And Kennedy was equally very young, within those early 40s.
Right.
So when we came into that, right now, the people who are in parliament, you can hardly recognize any of them.
That's true.
They were not in the last parliament. They were not luminaries or people in either in academia or in civil service or in a private sector in Europe. For example, during the time when I was in parliament, we had people from the private sector. I had the late Kihara, who was a former PS, permanent secretary. We had Michuki, who has such a powerful history. And a young man like me that time would sit with Michuki for hours. And it can never be exhaustive. You know, you learn so much. I sat with Lawrence Sagini and really mourned and cried when he died in an accident. So there was, and then the respect from the younger generation when you go in there, it's not just about psychophancy for the leadership that brought you in there, but it's also dignity and the level and the quality of what do you call debate. Biwott was there.
Right.
You know, you can say all sorts of things about Biwott, but the man had a history and a very powerful history.
Right.
So right now in the parliament, one, they're very young, most of them. Two, they don't even know the history of this country. You know what I mean? And they've never had exposure in critical areas or disciplines of interest. There are no educationists, too many of them. They are not people who are in the civil service and who are basically either head of civil service, permanent secretaries. So that narrative that was brought in by Jubilee sometimes back in 2013, that there has to be a generational change, was taken too far, in my opinion. And then, of course, all of them young people who are there because, more than anything else, they come from the party that has a blank check in that part of the country. And basically, for you to become an MP, you just have to be in the right team and be close to the right person. And that goes also for the opposition, for information.
Right.
We have done a serious disservice to this country because we have tried to micromanage the wishes of the people by imposing leadership on them. So because leadership in the opposition is imposed, they will listen to the outside. They look at the luminaries in the opposition and see whether the way they're going to conduct themselves on the floor of the House is going to please them or not.
So there's no independent thinking.
And the other thing, the other party is also doing the same, the government side. So we have a serious problem in this country that clearly we must be able to learn from it and see what we can do to change some of it. Because this parliament and the last parliament, something serious needs to be done about it.
Right. Javas, your take on he said quite a number of important things, really, but what is your take about that? Did we choose the wrong leaders? Are they...
Of the men seated here this morning, I am the only one who's not graced that August House. Of course, the taste is in my mouth a little. But agreeing with the sentiment that has been put forth here, it is true that there is the service that we've done to that institution as a people. There is the service that is being done by the men and women in that institution to the people. And then there is the disservice being done to the Constitution of Kenya today and the enabling pieces of legislation. Whether you look at it through the prism of the Legislative Council 1907, or whether you want to look at it from the post-independence Kenya, 1964, for example, when we had our first parliament, that by the carryovers of that period prior to Kenya's independence, we had a parliament that individuals or backbenchers could not do much except reacting to the proposition put forth or brought forth by the executive. Today, we have got a parliament that has got all the ability, the power, the instruments to do as it wishes to progress the agenda of that institution as anticipated by law. So when we get to have a process of putting individuals in that house through election that is flawed, because whether we want to look at it through Jubilee or even NASA, one, we know very well, and it's not been debated otherwise, that the process of nominations have been flawed always in this country. And therefore, we get to have individuals put into office who are willing to be just mere ball games in the hands of party leaders and not individuals driven by great aspirations and conviction to serve the people. So when a man or a woman rises on the floor of the August House and says, quite ably and eloquently perhaps, that we're not going to participate in the agenda on any business whatsoever of this House because of ABCD, and yet each month, as it's been put forth by even the individuals,
the residents,
the people, the denizens of this country, that these individuals, yes, are drawing salaries from the exchequer each month. They don't have a problem with that. If they intend actually and practically to withdraw from the business of the House, let them also withdraw from the mandate that they were given by the people to serve in that House. Other than that, I think it is games being taken too far. If we must respect the institutions and our laws, then to that great extent also as leaders, we must respect ourselves. By speaking from different sides of our mouths as leaders, it is to do great injustice to our history, and in fact to spit on the faces, and in fact throw away the durable struggle, the history of struggle of the leadership and the democracy and the independence of this country.
Right.
Men and women who fought to put Kenya where it is today did so much that we must actually not look at their struggles with ridicule. And I would agree therefore then with the Honorable Maalim that this issue of just propagating an agenda for purposes of having just younger people, for example, or a younger generation in parliament, yet there is nothing durable about that youngness, then actually is to do great disservice to the future history of this country.
All right. We need to wind up. I'd like to hear your thoughts, Honorable Uhuru. I will be taking a short commercial break in a few moments, but just to hear your thoughts, how do we then move forward from where we are with all the issues that have been raised here this morning? How do we move forward? How do we come from having a perception of having a weak parliament to having a vibrant, like the one that you were in?
Yes, I think young people, young representatives in parliament, they need to create that background for themselves, which is difficult in light of what we have been saying.
Yeah.
That many of them are not known for being independent, not for having achieved something out there, like in medicine or in public health or in education, something that is in their background, they can be able to take to parliament.
Right.
And that is what basically I think even Maalim is talking about when he talks about all those people who came from history of this country in public service and in delivery of services, and they need to teach themselves. And this thinking about the digital revolution. And it is true. I remember this 2012-2013 debate about the analog and the digital revolution. I think for many people who have thought about that aspect, it takes away a lot of the history of this country. It is not just this moment. Because I tend sometimes, even when I speak to my son, to think that his thinking is more about this moment. I would want to think more of in-depth thinking about where have we come from and where are we headed. That's why we're talking about the history of this country, the people who stood out and rejected colonialism. How do we stand out in parliament and anywhere else? Because what we have tried to do over the last maybe from the time Jaramogi Oginga Odinga in 1966 defied and dissented from Kenyatta, there has been a dissident movement in this country which has always been quietened. And that alternative view, that second opinion about your country, that criticism of your country, it is so important, whether in parliament or even outside. Have a second opinion about what you want to do.
Right.
A plan B, not a plan B so that you skip. It's a plan B so that you can evaluate what needs to be done in so many areas. Now, like in parliament now, I think that what is lacking there is some members who are saying we are going to keep away, they are saying we cannot make an informed decision in respect of this matter because already it has been predetermined long before we have to sit down and decide it.
Interesting. Honourable
I'll share a small experience with you. In the 7th Parliament, there was one time when we decided at a budget reading, in the presence of the head of state, His Excellency Daniel Tropich Arap Moi, that we were going to disrupt the whole thing, the opposition.
Yeah.
But other than the overzealous, young, energetic members who really, but then there was that section of us that really said you can only go so far in the disruption. We can disrupt it for a few minutes and make a little bit, just to show our outrage. But after that, the process has got to continue. And then some of them decided to now come out from their chairs and turn the place into something else. Clearly, more or less like a violence. And I remember myself who, despite my relative young age, was very close to all those old sages. I mean, Olaron Segini was like a father. The late Dennis Okumu, who used to be the Secretary General of Coatu. Coatu was Central Organization of African trade unions, all African trade unions, and you know, Michuki, they were all like parents to me. I really used to sit at their feet for hours and listen to them and get the history of that. So we came out from the opposition, those of us like Dennis Okumo, myself, Professor Oma Muga, some big minds, and we held on to that and literally were struggling with our own side of the divide to say the mess is the dignity and the symbol of this house. If you have to mess around with the mess, the way you can mess around with a small stick, no, then we can't allow this thing to go that far.
Right.
And then we settled our side, and there was the contest was not even between both sides. It's opposition, which you're saying. But because they were that generational, that experience, that what you call institutional memory, that teaching and learning is something that essentially at my time there, of course, was so powerful that you feel a sense of shame. It's like when you are an undergraduate student and you want to talk where there are professors and assert yourself.
Right.
You really take a back seat and allow yourself time to learn. Allow yourself time also to behave with that decorum that's expected. I remember one time I brought in a motion, affirmative action to quota systems, to fight for the marginalized areas, for us to have an easier way of our young boys and girls from those, the former NFD, accessing the university with lower points. And there was this very young, I don't want to mention his name, but very overzealous also, and a real, Kanu diehard youth, who was running, jumping up and down with points of order, and the late Biwot held him and stopped him and told him, don't interrupt again.
Right.
What that honorable member is transacting is a very important national business. And I was seconded on that motion by the late Ntimama, who was a minister in the government, in the opposition, in the Kanu government, and I was in the opposition.
Right.
So basically, for us to be able to reach out across the aisle, for this the national interest to come out, we have a problem. There has to be a serious debate on that. And then the leadership of the House. Finally, the leadership of the House, it needs to be, totally, I don't want to say reformed or transformed, but there has to be a transformation in the manner in which they see this whole thing. Because I think that is the way to look at it. I mean, in the 10th Parliament, there used to be some serious debate sometimes touching on the integrity of somebody like Raila Odinga, who was the Prime Minister and the leader of my party. Right. But from the chair, I cannot pretend that those members of Parliament do not have a right to discuss those things. I allowed them the leeway, not just to jump up because he's my leader, and I pretend like it's the end of the world, because then back at home, if I'm not seen doing that, then I cannot be elected. You know what I mean? Those are the kind of things that really needs to be done in this country and needs to be addressed, and I think that's the best. All right. Javas, your final thoughts. We need to wrap up.
Thank you, Betty.
Yeah.
For the members of Parliament to be worthy of the thanks of a nation, all of them, looking at it with regard to what is happening in Parliament today, all of them must stand chastised.